Is your garden looking more like a graveyard than a green oasis? Don't give up hope just yet. We've all been there, watching our beloved plants wither and die, feeling like we've failed as gardeners. But here's the thing. Knowing when to let go and when to fight for a second chance isn't about giving up on your gardening dreams. It's about making smart decisions that will ultimately lead to a thriving garden. Last summer, I stood in my backyard staring at what looked like a botanical massacre. My once promising vegetable garden had turned into a collection of yellowing leaves, stunted growth, and plants that seemed to be gasping for their last breath. The tomatoes that were supposed to be heavy with fruit were instead covered in brown spots. The peppers had stopped growing altogether, and my prized herb garden looked like it had been abandoned for months. Every gardener faces these moments of despair. Whether it's an unexpected drought that leaves your plants stressed and wilting, a pest invasion that seems impossible to control, or a mysterious disease that spreads through your garden like wildfire, these challenges can make even the most experienced gardeners question their abilities. The emotional investment we put into our gardens makes these failures particularly painful. We nurture our plants from seeds or seedlings, water them faithfully, and watch them grow, only to see them decline despite our best efforts. The key to navigating these difficult situations lies in understanding when persistence will pay off and when it's time to cut your losses and start fresh. This decision-making process isn't just about saving individual plants, it's about protecting the overall health of your garden ecosystem and preserving your own sanity and resources. Sometimes, despite our best intentions and efforts, plants reach a point where revival is simply not possible. Learning to recognize these situations early can save you time, money, and emotional energy that would be better invested elsewhere in your garden. When more than half of a plant is dead or dying, and you see no signs of new growth despite addressing obvious environmental issues, it's often time to accept defeat. This is particularly true if the plant has been struggling for several weeks or months without improvement. Dead plant material doesn't just look unsightly, it can become a breeding ground for pests and diseases that might spread to healthy plants nearby. Root rot presents one of the most challenging situations for plant revival. If you gently remove a plant from its container or dig around its base and find roots that are black, mushy, or have a foul smell, the root system has likely been compromised beyond repair. Root rot typically occurs due to overwatering or poor drainage, and once it takes hold, it's extremely difficult to reverse. The roots are essentially the plant's lifeline, and without a healthy root system, even the most determined gardener will struggle to save the plant. Similarly, when the main stem or trunk of a plant is dead, recovery becomes virtually impossible. You can test this by gently scratching the bark with your fingernail. If you see brown or black tissue underneath instead of green, the main vascular system has been compromised. This is particularly common after severe frost damage or when plants have been subjected to prolonged drought stress. Severe disease infestations also warrant immediate removal. Fungal diseases like powdery mildew or bacterial infections can spread rapidly through a garden, and keeping infected plants around in hopes of recovery often leads to losing multiple plants instead of just one. The same principle applies to serious pest infestations. Sometimes the damage is so extensive that the plant will never recover its vigor, even if you manage to eliminate the pests. However, many situations that initially appear hopeless can actually be turned around with the right approach and a bit of patience. Before you reach for the shovel, take time to properly diagnose what's really happening with your struggling plants. Environmental stress is often the culprit behind declining plant health, and unlike diseases or pest damage, environmental issues can usually be corrected with relatively simple adjustments. If your plants are showing signs of stress like yellowing leaves, stunted growth, or poor flowering, start by evaluating their growing conditions. Are they receiving the right amount of sunlight? Many gardeners underestimate how much light requirements can vary between plants and locations within the same garden. Water stress, both too much and too little, accounts for a significant percentage of plant problems. Overwatering is actually more common than underwatering, especially in containers or clay soils with poor drainage. Check the soil moisture by inserting your finger about 2 inches deep. If it's consistently soggy, you may need to adjust your watering schedule or improve drainage. Conversely, if the soil is pulling away from the edges of containers or feels bone dry several inches down, your plants may be suffering from drought stress. Soil quality issues can often be addressed with amendments and patience. If your plants are showing signs of nutrient deficiency, such as yellowing leaves, poor growth, or unusual discoloration, a soil test can reveal what's missing. Adding compost, adjusting pH, or providing targeted fertilization can often bring struggling plants back to life over the course of a growing season. Sometimes the solution is as simple as relocating a plant to a more suitable spot in your garden. A plant that's struggling in full sun might thrive in partial shade, or one that's languishing in a low-lying area could really flourish on higher ground with better drainage. While transplanting can be stressful for plants, it's often worth the risk if the current location is clearly inappropriate. The decision between persistence and replacement shouldn't be made hastily, but it also shouldn't drag on indefinitely. Set reasonable timelines for seeing improvement. Typically, if you don't see positive changes within 2 to 4 weeks of addressing environmental issues, it may be time to consider other options. Consider the overall context of your garden when making these decisions. A single struggling plant in an otherwise healthy garden might be worth the extra effort to save, especially if it's a particularly valuable or sentimental specimen. However, if multiple plants are failing in the same area, it might indicate a more systemic problem that needs to be addressed before replanting. Economic factors also play a role in these decisions. Sometimes, the cost of treatments, amendments, or even the time investment needed to nurse a plant back to health actually exceeds the cost of just replacing it. This is especially true for annual plants or inexpensive perennials that honestly can be easily replaced. Think about the learning opportunity that each situation presents. A plant that's struggling because of an environmental mismatch, well, it teaches you some valuable lessons about site selection and plant requirements. And a pest or disease problem helps you develop better monitoring and prevention strategies. Even failures, believe it or not, contribute to your growing knowledge and expertise as a gardener. Gardening is fundamentally about working with natural cycles of growth, decline, and renewal. Even in the most carefully tended gardens, some plants will thrive while others struggle, and accepting this reality is really part of becoming a skilled gardener. The goal isn't to save every single plant, but to create and maintain a healthy, thriving garden ecosystem overall. Every experienced gardener has a collection of failures behind them. Plants that didn't make it despite their best efforts, experiments that didn't work out, and seasons that didn't go as planned. These experiences aren't setbacks, they're an essential part of the learning process. Each plant that doesn't survive teaches you something valuable about soil conditions, plant selection, timing, or care techniques. The most successful gardeners are those who can balance optimism with realism, persistence with practicality. They know when to fight for a struggling plant and when to let it go gracefully. They understand that gardening is a long-term endeavor where individual losses are less important than the overall health and productivity of the garden. Remember that gardening is supposed to be enjoyable. If you find yourself constantly stressed about struggling plants, it might be time to step back and reevaluate your approach. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your garden and yourself is to remove the sources of stress and focus on the plants that are thriving. As you continue your gardening journey, embrace both the successes and the challenges. Each growing season brings new opportunities to learn, experiment, and improve. The plants you save through careful attention and the right interventions will give you tremendous satisfaction, while the ones you choose to let go will make room for new possibilities. If you found this guide helpful in navigating the challenging decisions every gardener faces, please subscribe to Smart Garden for more practical gardening advice and share this video with fellow gardeners who might be struggling with similar decisions. Together we can all become more skilled, confident, and successful gardeners.